In a world drowning in bad news, welcome to the Rational Optimist podcast, where we challenge what you think you know about today's headlines. Coming up, is the American dream alive and well? A recent debate yielded some surprising answers. Next, nobody's celebrating the world's newest nuclear power plant, so I guess we'll have to. And finally, we look at an important court case that the government lost and why it's a sign of great things to come if you hate bureaucracy and stifling government overreach like we do. First up, Stephen, you're not an American. You're an honorary American in my book, though. Tell us about this new debate on the American dream held by the Free Press.
Do you know what, Dan? I have to start with a funny story. I met a subscriber here in Abu Dhabi last night, and he said, Stephen, you're Irish, but how come you know everything about America? And I said, for all intents and purposes, I'm American. So yeah, our friend Tyler Cowan, the author of the Marginal Revolution blog, he took part in a debate hosted by the Free Press a week or two ago. And it was basically about, is the American dream still alive? Good news is Tyler's side, who was arguing for, won by 1%, I think. So the people still know, believe in their bones, the American dream is still alive. But what I find strange is that when you look at polls, the average person, the ABC poll, a recent one, 67% of people said the country is heading in the wrong direction. I think maybe my most heretical belief right now is it's morning in America. If you ignore all the political bickering and you look at what actually generates prosperity and wealth, innovation and technology, it's never been better, or never been better in 50 years at least.
I really enjoyed the debate. So the format was they poll the audience before they hear the debate, is the American dream alive and well? And it was like 74% or somewhere in there said, yes, it is. 26% said it's not. And then at the end, they poll them again to see which side moves the opinion in their favor. And like you said, Tyler's side moved the opinion 1% in the favor of the American dream. So he won the debate by a slim margin. It's hard to change people's minds, though. I feel like changing 1% of an audience's mind is a pretty big accomplishment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What was your, did you have any takeaways from the debate, like favorite points or anything like that?
I really enjoyed watching people who completely disagree with each other talk respectfully. It was really nice, and I really respect the Free Press a lot for being able to organize that and put it on. So Tyler came with the facts like you would expect him to do. One of the most surprising ones is that Indian American immigrants, the median household income is $150,000 a year. So he sort of took the angle that immigrants in America do so much better here than they would in their home country. And they're sort of like the bottom, like the most vulnerable parts of society that don't have a network and don't have a history here. So if they can do well, his case was that anyone should be able to do well. And that's evidence that the American dream is alive and well.
Absolutely. That really is the American dream, right? I mean, that was the original one. You come to the country with $150 in your pocket or whatever, and you do something amazing. Tell me, obviously we know the world has never been better by most metrics, but why do you think so many people think the American dream is dead, or things haven't, things are worse and getting worse?
So the other side of the debate, I have to give credit where credit's due, was two people. One was the founder of Jacobin, which I did not find him convincing at all. But the other guy was David Leonhardt from the New York Times. And the New York Times it's largely squandered its reputation for being objective. So I had low expectations going in, but he was really, really great. The points he made were really, really great. He pointed out basically that in America, diseases of despair and opioid addiction are on the rise big time. Loneliness is on the rise big time. There's a declining birth rate. Life expectancy is declining. So he pointed out that all these negative trends that aren't just headed in the wrong direction for America, but several of them, like life expectancy, we've decoupled from the rest of the world. It's not even close anymore.
I have an interesting perspective on that. So I think if you break it down by regions in America, people in the Northeast where you are actually live longer than Europeans. I think the problem is that the life expectancy stats in America have been kind of destroyed by the opioid epidemic, which I think kills 100,000 young Americans relatively young Americans every single year. So that really skews the numbers. And also, you have gun violence, which you don't really have to that magnitude in any other country. And you also have many, many more road deaths. So those are little caveats. I think if you actually break down the life expectancy, the wealthy areas in America are up there with the top tier. But I guess the caveats, sometimes caveats don't apply when it comes to life expectancy, right?
Yeah, and the side arguing against the American dream, they kept coming back to this point that people in some Western European countries are happier and live longer and like more socially secure. And Tyler just has the ultimate trump card because he runs Emergent Ventures where he talks to young people from all around the world. And he goes, no one's ever asked me, how do I get into Denmark? It's always, how do I get into United States? And we have our problems, but if you want to build a company and make yourself wealthy, there's no better place than the US. And I don't think it's particularly close.
It's not close. It's not close. So it's I often think of the US as like a continent. It's like the largest free trade zone in the world, right? Because you have 360 million people, I think, at this stage of relative like high wealth compared to the rest of the year, and the rest of the world. It's just awesome.
It really depends on how you define the American dream too. So to me, it's that anyone, if they work hard and really want to, can be successful, which I wholeheartedly believe that if that's your definition of the American dream, I don't see how you can say that it's not alive and well. The anti-side was basically making the case that, well, not everyone achieves that. And sure, that's true. Part of being an American is you get to make your choices. And some people that doesn't turn out well. A lot of people it does.
I know inequality is a big part of this, but just if you take this one sliver and say, are societies where people are equal good? It's actually not. Countries that have inequality are generally better places to live. I know that's counterintuitive, but everyone says everyone is equal in Cuba and North Korea, and I don't see many people wanting to live in them places.
That's because everybody's equally poor there.
Right, exactly. So the UAE, where I am right now, just opened the world's newest nuclear power plant. So these 4 dome-shaped reactors, which you can see on the screen now, they're going to produce enough electricity to power the entire country of New Zealand for a whole year. What are your thoughts on this one, then?
So the Barkha nuclear power plant, it'll provide 25% of the UAE's electricity too. This is great for the UAE. I wish we were doing this in America. It's worth repeating every time we talk about it that nuclear's only problem is PR. Nuclear energy is clean, it's safe, it's abundant, and it could be cheap. The only reason it's not is regulations.
I love this idea from Josh Wolf, which is essentially, nuclear has a branding problem. Let's rebrand it as elemental energy. Because of course it comes from the elements, it comes from uranium. But I think if you rebranded it elemental energy and you could, that pen in Men in Black that erases everyone's memory. Imagine you could do that and you could erase anyone's memory of nuclear. If you did that and you presented nuclear energy the next day, everyone would be screaming from the rooftops about how climate change had been solved. So I agree. As a PR problem.
I like how these things look too. These reactors look in the UAE. They seem like they blend in with the like aesthetic of the country, right? With the domes.
Right.
I mean, one of the problems with nuclear is the big smokestacks. They look like smokestacks. They actually just produce water vapor, but the big smokestacks are ugly. People associate it with pollution and danger. So maybe a big step in the right direction is to just make prettier nuclear reactors.
I love that. That's actually a great idea. I don't think anyone's mentioned that before. Another thing is that just how positive it is that the UAE, it's obviously an oil-rich country. It's putting up lots of solar panels, and now it's building nuclear power plants. And we've talked about in the Rational Optimist Diary and on this show before just how important energy is. It's kind of hidden from us because you turn the lights on or you turn the washing machine on and you expect it to work. But if you can make energy cheap, you can make everything in our lives much, much cheaper, which kind of enables much more innovation and, resources to go elsewhere. So Bullish on countries that have a stated policy of energy abundance.
Me too. So, do you know who built the nuclear reactors in the UAE?
It was the South Korean company, right?
Yep. Do you know why?
Because South Korea produces nuclear reactors, I think 5 times cheaper than we can do it in America.
That's exactly right. So people
There you
push
go.
back. People push back on nuclear by saying it's expensive, and it is expensive, but it's expensive because of regulations and bureaucracy. It's not naturally expensive, and the proof for that is that exactly like you said, South Korea builds them 4 to 5 times cheaper than the U.S. Although I don't know what 4 to 5 times cheaper means, but like 80% cheaper, we'll call it.
Right, right. It's a better way of putting it. Yeah, if you think about if you built a factory to produce just one car, that's going to be a very expensive car, right? Because like all the machines, all the equipment, all the labor is just gone on one car. But if you produce 100,000 of them, you can sell them for much cheaper, and that's kind of the deal with the nuclear power plants. In the West, we put up one every decade, and it costs $14 billion.
Imagine where we'd be if we had been innovating and improving nuclear for the last 50 years instead of just letting it stagnate or forcing it to stagnate.
I always come up with flying cars and like desalinating or turning seawater into fresh water, but I actually think it's so limited thinking. I actually can't think of all the amazing things that we would have been able to produce had we had cheap, clean, abundant energy for 50 years.
What's your wildest dream? Could we do something like control the weather?
I think you could easily control the weather. Yeah, I walk
Easily.
outside. Well, I mean, with enough energy. Or what about like floating trains? Or what about like tubes to the moon or to Mars that just like vault you up? I don't know.
Now you're
What
getting.
about you?
Now you're really optimistic. I don't know. My son's been really into the idea of teleportation lately. I don't think that's physically possible, but that would be a cool one. Snap your fingers and you're home in Ireland instead of taking what is it, a 7 hour flight home?
Yeah, never say no. Oh, there's another one. I guess you could have nuclear power planes that go from London to New York in, I don't know, an hour. Be cool.
We already got the submarines.
Got the submarines. Well, I will say we're kind of we're saying how difficult it is to build in America. There is some hope because two nuclear power plants are due to be restarted. One in Michigan and one down in your home state of Pennsylvania. They're on about restarting 3 Mile Island, which is a big deal, and I think it just shows that the world is after 50 years of stagnation. We're slowly coming back to the idea that we do need nuclear energy.
Yeah, beyond that, it's symbolic because 3 Mile Island is the biggest nuclear disaster in our country's history. And you say the phrase 3 Mile Island, and people are like, "Whoa, nuclear dangerous!" But people don't know nobody was hurt in 3 Mile Island.
Right.
So I hope that story gets out there.
Last question on this: why do facts not matter when it comes to nuclear energy? So all the facts have been on our side, and we know it, but why does it not matter?
It's all emotion. It's ugly and scary, and all the statistics in the world cannot stand up to a really good story. And it's just a really good story that a nuclear meltdown could, contaminate everybody within a 10-mile radius of the nuclear power plant.
Would you live next to a nuclear power plant?
I mean, I like the outdoors, so I wouldn't want to live next to a big gray concrete building of any type. But if you're asking if I would do it for safety purposes, like, yes, I absolutely would. Would you?
100%. 100%. I think they would also give you maybe they'd like give you free electricity. I know when you live near stadiums in Europe, they give you free tickets to all the games and the concerts and stuff like that. I could see something the same at nuclear power plants.
All right, let's move on. On stage last week, Elon Musk said it takes longer to do the government paperwork to license a rocket launch than to design and build the actual rocket. This seems like a good time to talk about the blight.
Right, right. So the blight is a term coined by our friend Andrew Cote, and I think before we get into it, it's it's incredibly important to have words or terms for something, because you think about Trump and fake news, right? You didn't, once you had the word and you could identify what it was, you didn't have to write an academic paper and explain every time you saw that thing. So Andrew coined this term, the blight, and the blight is basically the idea that stifling regulation and bureaucracy, they are the things that are holding us back in ways that are hard to overstate. And I think this Elon thing is just a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and it extends so far beyond technology too. Like if you look at the most broken industries in the US, you'd probably say they're healthcare and education. And both of them are plagued by skyrocketing numbers of administrators, people who draw big salaries and I don't even really know what they do, but they're not teaching and they're not doctors, but they make these things so expensive just being there, and that's just a symptom of the blight too.
How do we fight the blight?
I don't know, mock it like we're doing right now. That should help.
I think it is important, because I don't think people realize just how bad it's gotten. So you mentioned healthcare. There's been a 1,200% growth in administrators in healthcare versus a 100% growth in nurses and doctors since I think 1970. Right, so 12 to 1. Why do we not have more doctors and nurses rather than people pushing paper around? And of course, the the out of control healthcare costs always get pinned on greedy capitalists, and that's really not the case, because the government, through the blight, designs all these rules and regulations that just requires you to hire tons and tons of people pushing paper around.
It's really the takeover of medicine by insurance companies too. Like if you look at United Health or Cigna stock since the Affordable Care Act was passed, what is it, 12 years ago now, 14 years ago?
14.
They're up 1,000% or more. They're some of the best stocks to own in America. They look like Amazon or Netflix or Google in the early 2000s. And they're just making money hand over fist on this.
Do you think people would have predicted that back in 2010? Because I feel like that was a very surprising outcome for a lot of people.
I mean, so the law requires people to buy insurance, right? If a law was passed that required people to buy seafood, I think seafood companies would probably do really well.
Right, right. I think there is some hope here, right? So I think this has really been a 50-year. The blight is like a 50-year phenomenon. If you go back to the 70s, you had the outlawing of supersonic fly, you had the crackdown on nuclear energy, tons of other examples that we can point to. But I feel like entrepreneurs right now, billionaires like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel or Mark Andreessen, are kind of standing up and saying, enough. We have to take matters into our own hands, and we have to highlight the problems that are going on. And most of all, they're going after these big important areas, right? So we're seeing Elon kind of single-handedly revive the space economy.
I think it was Elon's idea. I think you could solve this in one fell swoop with a change to the government, and that's every law comes with an expiration date. Every law lasts, say, 10 years, and then it has to be revisited and revoted back into being a law, because we continuously layer law on top of law on top of law until eventually everything's illegal. And there's no real incentive to take laws away for politicians, because they would be voting to reduce their own power, which is not something politicians do.
Right. I'm hopeful that can get done, but maybe not in our lifetimes. Maybe it'll take a crisis to get there.
Well, if Elon can take over the government efficiency or create a government efficiency panel, that could be a step in the right direction.
I know this is it's a much easier thing to do, but what Elon did with Twitter was quite amazing. He showed you can reform a completely bureaucratic, sclerotic company. So I think he went in there and he fired 85-90% of the staff, and the product still worked. Imagine you could do that in Washington, D.C.
We're in the extreme minority as Elon fanboys. People hate Elon. One of our team members was posting on Reddit to try to spread the message of the Rational Optimist Society yesterday, and he put a story about how one of Elon's companies is on its way to curing certain types of blindness, and people just piled on that they hate the guy.
Interesting. I think would build statues of him. He's done more for, if you care about the environment, he's done more for the environment than any journalist out there or any political do-gooder with Tesla, and we could go on and on, right?
I agree. And our
Maybe
next topic will demonstrate that.
see that great segue. So last week, Elon Musk's SpaceX, they achieved the first ever private spacewalk in history. Took humans 1,400 kilometers above the Earth. It's the furthest we've been in over 50 years since the Apollo program.
Everyone, right after this podcast, everyone should go watch this video. It's a 10-minute video. It's incredibly cool and inspiring. You see the astronaut peek half of his body out of the space capsule, and he's holding onto a handle. He's strapped on, obviously, too. And then you see the curvature of the Earth in the background, and like half of it's lit up and half of it's dark. It's just so inspiring. And then the astronaut, he gives an all-time quote. He says, "Back at home, y'all still got a lot of work to do, but from up here, it sure looks like a perfect world." And it's so inspiring. It should be on the news, right?
Absolutely. And the White House didn't even acknowledge it, which is incredible. I mean, I think SpaceX funding space exploration from a network of internet satellites, which is obviously Starlink, and making it possible with joint reusable rockets, 5,000-ton rockets that land themselves. It's just the greatest engineering feat in history, and it's awe-inspiring to see.
The other thing you'll notice in the video is you think of astronauts as having these like big, bulky suits with like chest packs out to here. The spacesuits are sleek. They look more like F1 drivers these days than old school astronauts. So it's cool to see the progress.
Watching this video made me just realize how incredible it was that NASA did this back in 1969 to put a man on the moon. I mean, that's just incredible, right? Over 50 years ago.
I know. The other part of the video I really enjoyed is you get to hear what I assume are the engineers and the people who worked on the technology that got them to space. They're just clapping and yelling, and so they achieved something incredible and they're enjoying it, and I'm glad they are.
I know there's a lot of people out there that would be saying this is cool and everything, but why does going to space affect me? What's the answer to that one?
It opens up possibilities. It opens up the possibility of a space economy. I've heard that there are certain drugs that can be developed in space that can't be developed on Earth. I've heard there's certain components that can be developed in zero gravity, and the pureness of space that can't be developed on Earth.
Yeah. And the other thing is that when, going to SpaceX has slashed the cost of going to space by 95%. And when you do that to something, it just opens up an incredible possibility. So with Starship, or even with the Falcon 9 rockets right now, they basically launch a bus into space every couple of days, and then you can go onto the website and you can book your product's seat on that space, and that just opens up so many new possibilities, right? To manufacture drugs in space, to manufacture faster fiber optic cables, all these things, the asteroid mining. Pretty incredible world of possibilities.
People don't give entrepreneurs the credit they deserve for reducing costs of things. It's really a heroic thing to do, to reduce the cost of spaceflight by 95%, for example, or reduce the cost of energy, as we've done lately with the fracking boom and natural gas. And like if you bring it back to thinking about like big picture, people used to have to spend all of their time growing food. And they basically, another way to say that is they spent 100 or 90% of their income on food. And these days, people spend 10, 20% of their income on food, which frees them up to do other things, invest in other things, pursue other things. So I think we need to give a round of applause for these entrepreneurs who are reducing costs across the board.
Completely agree. And I think that's one way that it's almost like you don't see the progress in the statistics. But if you just take a snapshot of daily life back in the 60s or 70s, there was no catalytic converters. So cars were just pumping out pollution. Compare a TV for today to 50 years ago with the price and the quality, all these types of things that you kind of forget about, but actually make daily life so much better. I actually met Brian Kaplan this morning, who's a professor at George Mason University and a prolific author. And he asked me an interesting question. I was complaining about the lack of supersonic flight. And he said, would you rather supersonic flight with the routes that you could fly back in 1970, or would you rather no supersonic flight in what we have today? And I had to admit that I think today is better because you have so many more routes.
Yeah, but we could have both is the point.
That's true, but it's just an interesting thought experiment.
Okay, I like that. All right. We got our first taste of how things might change since the Supreme Court overturned Chevron deference. Prediction markets company Kalshi won its case against the CFTC, making political prediction markets legal in America for the first time in years. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so why does this obscure court case matter? Basically, there was a law passed in 1984 which granted regulatory agencies, the FDA, the NRC, and so on, to interpret laws how they see fit. Basically, put unelected bureaucrats in charge of America. And this Kalshi case is so important because in ruling against the CFTC and therefore opening up political betting markets in America, the judge cited Chevron in the case. Basically said, hey, look, pass a law banning election markets or get out of the way. There's no more gray area and there's no more kind of leeway for you to regulate as you want.
Yeah, the other side of this debate is like, this is going to lead to anarchy. But no, we're just asking, when you want to ban something, government, you have to pass a law to do so, as was originally intended. You can't just do it from on high, from an administrative court or from an administrative agency.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go wager all my money on the election, but I think it's exciting the possibilities it opens up. We were just talking about regulation a while ago, and if you go back to 1974 when Congress set up the NRC, they didn't give them an explicit mandate to basically ban nuclear energy. The NRC has just been making up the rules as it goes. So this is a real check on their power. They're going to have to think twice before they start just dictating what entrepreneurs can do, because they know they're going to get sued and brought to court.
The same thing with crypto. Sorry, that's illegal, Gensler says. And he doesn't explain why or how or tell you how to make it legal. It's just illegal. Right. And if you do it, we're going to fine you and potentially throw you in jail.
Right. What else do you see as the offshoots of this? What's the second order consequences? What's going to change the most?
Well, I hope it's a strike directly to the heart of the blight, where it's not so easy for so government agencies, administrative agencies, they regulate. That's what they do. It's like if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're a regulator, everything looks like something that needs to be regulated. And what that does is it slows down progress across the board. I don't know if I could say what industry it impacts the most, but probably something in the technology sphere, maybe AI. What do you think?
Yeah, I think in the future, I think it's coming at just the right time, because you're starting to see, the alphabet soup of regulatory agencies try to kind of pass, not laws, but kind of decrees about how we should use AI. So I think it might be coming at just the right time to save AI. But as regards our existing economy, I think healthcare is a big one. It's 10 years and $2.3 billion to get a drug on pharmacy shelves. Maybe we can cut into that a little bit, maybe in housing, where there's all these crazy laws about where you can build and how much land each house has to have. So I'm hoping something there, because that would drive down prices and drive up quality for everybody.
How about energy production too? Fracking specifically. Fracking's still banned in a lot of states, like in New York, I believe, for no real reason whatsoever. There was worries a while ago that it might cause earthquakes or light your tap water on fire, or things like that have been disproven.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I mean, New York just kicking itself, right? Because they also closed their nuclear power plant. And what happened when they did that? Emissions went up because they had to replace it with, I think, coal or natural gas, which, although is clean, is still a lot dirtier than nuclear. So maybe this experiment will go on for another 10 years. And then states that have fracking or build nuclear power plants, the energy will just be so cheap, so much cheaper than other parts of America, that the other states will be like, nah, we got to do something.
Vermont will never give in. I heard a Vermont politician say the other day that we don't compete on cost. In other words, Vermont has the highest insurance rates in the country. They have some of the highest energy prices in the country, and it's all deliberate because it's all because of the regulations and bureaucracy.
D-Cell Central, huh?
They closed the nuclear power plant, their only nuclear power plant, 10 years ago. And right before we talked, I Googled it because I don't actually know the story. And what immediately comes up on Google is that they closed it because it was not cost. They couldn't compete on cost with much cheaper electricity generated by natural gas, which I'm sure is true. But again, the reason that it is expensive in the first place is regulation.
Hey guys, I thought you said you didn't compete on costs.
Everybody competes on costs. They don't all admit it.
Of course. I want to close with something positive. So, people always go on about the good old days. And I like to ask a question to tell me, at what period in time would you rather be alive than today? Right? And I think it's interesting to look back at the good old days. And when you do, you realize they were the bad old days. So there was this great Atlantic article, I think in 2015, and it highlighted the work of photographer Lewis Hine, who in 1908 went around all the factories and manufacturing plants in America and documented some of the 2 million child laborers in their work that were working. And I just want to show you a picture on screen right now of 2 6-year-old girls and a 10-year-old who worked in a factory. And just take a look at that picture. You can see they're wearing dirty rags, and although they're only 6 and 10, look at their withered old faces. And I thought this quote was sad, but it was eye opening. One of the girls' mothers, who was quoted in the piece, said, who also worked in the factory, said, "She don't go to school, works all the time." So you and I have 5 and 6-year-olds. Imagine that being your child. So when people talk about wanting to return to the past, no way. I want to live in the future. So let's build that great future together.
I love it. Great way to end. All right, we'll talk next week.
Talk soon, Dan. Thanks.